You know, it's all good. It's the
Hello.
High Mark Podcast, Episode 6. Jesse Carstairs, Alex Flanagan, Ty Flanagan.
What's going
We're
on?
going to be talking about what President Trump's up to, maybe where the Republicans are in electing their next candidate. And we're going to touch on inflation. We're going to be touching on the Israel-Hamas situation. So there's going to be some fireworks today. Oh, yeah. So I guess I am going to start with Chamath Palihapitiya on the All In podcast, talking about former President Donald Trump. He had mentioned that previously he thought he was an F for a president. He had Trump derangement syndrome, like many of the United States. And I'm not saying this as a fan, someone who's pro or against Donald Trump, just letting you know what Chamath said. And then Chamath said he started to look back and he realized that the guy wasn't going to end the world, that he wasn't just a total racist. And he said, I had to look at the situation on the border. This guy wanted a secure border, and instead they killed the messenger. This guy wanted to issue 100-year bonds, which Chamath totally believes that we should have done, but instead we killed the messenger. It would have helped our financial situation that the country's in right now. Trump wanted to solve situations in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, but they wanted to kill the messenger, stuff with Putin and Russia. And because of who he was, we wanted to not create progress in this country. And he actually had to take a step back and say, I believe this. He, as a president, he was a solid B+. And I think too many of us, we get stuck in our tribalism. We really want to associate with a team and not actually steel man anything. We don't ever want to, take a step back and look at the broader picture of things, regardless of political party. And I think more of us in this country need to be doing that. What are you guys?
Both sides, honestly.
Oh yeah.
That need for oversight to take a step back is honestly needed for both sides today. The fog is so dense. I feel like it's hard to understand. Really.
I always urge the whole world is so consumed by tribalisms of one another that America, if it really wants to be exceptional, really try to reach across the aisle, really try to think outside the box, and really try to get out of your tribe and find good solutions. Take good solutions from the other tribe, if anything, and just don't allow yourself to get box yourself in. And I think Chamath is showing like a great American example of how to do that. Like he reassessed what he was thinking. You know what I mean? He's like really doing some real smart approaches to his politics, his personal politics. And I think more of us should do that. No doubt about it.
That's interesting. We should look more into how that happened and how we get things like Trump derangement syndrome and, on the inverse of that as well.
Yeah, exactly. I remember, trying not to, I guess, bring up family members. But I'm going to give an example. There was someone who reached out to me and said that they felt like they didn't want to talk about politics anymore because Trump was elected. And I was like, there's this really good audio that I have by Darren Hardy, who's the editor and publisher of Success Magazine. And he doesn't talk about anything about Trump. His thing is on how to look at the positives out of every single situation that you're in and every single outcome, even if it wasn't the one you wanted. Jocko Willink does something similar where he's like, you didn't get that promotion? Good. It allows you to work harder.
Yeah.
This didn't go how you wanted? Good. You get to revisit it and look at it from another angle.
Mm-hmm.
And this person, and I offered this audio to this person and they said, you know what? We're really smart people. We don't need to listen to that. And it's like, we can get so stuck in our ways that those same people have the same outlook on life. And it's like, man, how is it that we take our blinders off and really look at what's the benefit of the American people, not what we want the benefit to be because of our tribalism, because of what they tell us it should be. But how do we look at it as genuinely what the best situation is for the country and the American people in this country?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the first step of that is often when I talk to one side or the other about that kind of tribalism concept, most say that, oh, but the other side's tribalism, but we're not, and the first step of you always doing is saying, no, we both are. That's it's like the alcoholic where first step's accepting it
Yeah.
or whatever. So, it's truth. There's truth there.
Yeah.
I totally hold the belief that they're two of like the same system, like they're just two sides of the same system that need to work together in order to for us to actually progress. But right now, it's so interlocked within those tribalisms that there's just no way that they can reach across and be able to function within each other.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. Your guys' reach across the aisle example is the American people, not necessarily the politicians. Because I view the politicians as just the Bloods and the Crips. They're of the same philosophy in things, which is not the best for the American people, but for their parties. And oftentimes when they get together and do agree on things, they come up with like the Patriot Act. They come up with like the what was the Inflation Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. And it's like, well, the amount of spending you guys are doing is actually causing inflation. And then there you see all these pork bills in those things. When they're working together, it seems like they spend the most amount of money, which is impacting our future and our children's future. But as people, we don't reach across the aisle and actually figure out who collectively we're going to place in office. We pit ourselves against each other.
I can see what you're saying.
The tribalism in its sense says that my party has the answers, and essentially what we're all so frustrated with, and we're kind of falling back into this loop that plagues many other countries, is we say that my side has the answers, but when both parties are in office and have majorities, those answers don't come, and so they're super frustrated. So then you vote for an even more crazier person, and so on and so forth on both aisles. And trying to resolve this fundamental issue, of it. And the fact is, that's how messy it is. Both the American people can be at times not knowing what they're doing and voting for. And then the same thing with the politicians. They try to pit the American people against each other, but then they're all often having golf and Thanksgiving dinner together. So the fact that they're mortal enemies, as the American people might think on the Twitter sphere, just isn't the case. Just simply isn't.
And that's where I get the whole thing and the whole idea that this is almost like a show or like a play. And I know that's a hyperbolic version of it, but it's almost to the degree where they are putting on a show, and we're kind of just like, we got to fight for our side.
There's definitely an element of that to it. There's absolutely there's an element to the show because, like I said, these guys aren't mortal enemies. I think, as we said before, right. A true example of that was in the Civil War, the actual Civil War. One senator came into the actual Senate House and caned another to death. That's when they're not going to Thanksgiving dinner anymore. That's when they're not having golf together. That's a different story. But what's the dynamic we're having right now is they'll have a soapbox speech about how the other side's such a problem, but then go to dinner with them. I think that's even more insidious and more dangerous in a lot of ways, and that's why there's such gridlock. When we're talking about gridlock is because our sides that we're rallying to fix are not actually working as opposites. They are working together as a unit.
And that's an interesting conundrum because you would want them to work together, right? And like the perfect balance. You want them having dinners together and wanting to work together, but
not too much.
Well, not too much, but you don't also want them coming out and publicly saying they're a threat to democracy or coming out and saying all this terrible things which you shouldn't say about someone who you're working with or trying to work, to get something done. I don't know.
Exactly. That's what makes it. It's never black and white, man. It's so great. It's like you want them to work together, but not too much. You don't want them to be too far apart, but not too much. It's like everybody wants absolutes and burn them all to the ground or whatever. But that's not how
it's never that easy.
And that's not how. And the American, we're given the great opportunity to try to navigate that in the best way we can, and we're the great test to see whether whether that can work in the world. We had talked about it on the trip, and we had a vacation, and it was an interesting concept that what is the longest lasting and most successful political system in history? Can you guys guess?
It's an empire.
Victim.
Yes.
It's not a democracy.
So the actual longest lasting, it might be a big surprise to many Americans to know that actually in the vast majority of human history that's written, it's not a democracy that has lasted. So it's on us to work together to make sure that the system works, because it's still very much in action. It's not just some fait accompli. It's not something that's already done deal. We're going to have democracy forever.
Yeah, we don't.
It's simply
We don't want to have a Caesar to have to come in and get us straighten our stuff out. We don't want that. We want to prove that democracy. Well, I guess it's like a combined or hybrid version of democracy. But yeah, it's something we need to.
It more or less is. It's like the representative form. We're still getting represented in our political views. So we want to prove that this system works, and the more we get tribalism, and the more that our politicians don't pass laws that help us, the more that our system is showing that it can't last the test of time. And the one that has lost the test of time is not the one that represents America right now. So I think a lot of Americans, as they go back into their tribalism, they should really consider that the republic is not some forever promise. It is very much on us to make it work and keep it working.
That's a great point. Yeah.
That's the vast majority of history was not a democracy or a republic.
Yeah, so we should pay attention to that and take note.
That's my point. Yeah, that we should really pay attention to that every time everyone talks about this stuff. Is like, to say that democracy is like the final step of political governance and things. Not necessarily. And that's not necessarily at all. I don't buy that at all.
That's why I think we kind of are on a slippery slope when we praise our presidents as much, as these, these God type figures who are celebrities almost. Because that's how I feel like how you get a Caesar almost. You have these ethereal people come in who know what to do, and then they come in, and then now they're they are taking over.
As we talked before, they have a cabinet, they got Senate. It's amazing how much we attribute to one person in the office, whether it's Obama, it's all Obama's fault, or it's all Trump's fault. I find a lot of that discourse really bizarre because it just actually, to me, often shows that they're not educated enough to know about the system that they're actually talking about. Because it's they're not kings, they're not emperors in any sense, and cannot just make fiat mandates without any
presidents have relatively little power, I feel like, compared to historical sense of
Oh, for sure. Oh my goodness. Yeah, they're so clipped in the wings compared to Napoleon. Did you guys see that new trailer coming out for Napoleon? Dude, that dude had absolute power. That's a whole different concept. And so to say that these guys have some kind of absolute power is total nonsense, and they really are not getting the picture. But also, if you really believe that Obama or Trump has absolute power, these people get really fearful. They start emotionally getting detached from reality, because they're attributing that this guy's like a Napoleon. They actually think that he can overthrow things easily at whim and pass things at whim and do this and that. American president, to be honest, has a lot more power often than a prime minister or equivalent in a European parliament system. But in terms of, like you said, historical scales of divine right kings and stuff, it's not even comparable. They're not even on the same.
Yeah.
They're not even on the same level.
Not even close.
Not even close.
And it was Alexis de Tocqueville. He warned the world about democracies and how they will ultimately end up failing, becoming totalitarian, and then just going away with the wind, just like all the previous ones. And he also warned that the American Republic will last forever until Congress decides that they can bribe the public with the public's own money.
Those are two that kind of are rhyming, aren't they? And I've always said of the Republic, similar to ancient Rome at its founding, when a Republic is working, it's unbeatable. Rome was literally surrounded by emperors and kings and smashed them all with their early Republic. They were so much more efficient. When everyone's working together and everyone has a stake in building up the country, there's nothing like it. It's unbeatable. However, over time, that same unity creates division within it. And if you don't really work together on maintaining those systems of unity, which we've just kind of we're number one. We don't need to worry about all this stuff. We needed to be worried about the whole time, for all through the 20th century. The whole time we need to be worrying about it, and especially now. And we just kind of, since the Cold War, I feel like we kind of just took a back seat on terms of that political reform, and saying, oh, our system won, we're good, we're number one, we don't need to worry about like reforms and improving our systems. We'll just coast, and we've been coasting, and now it's starting to show cracks.
Yeah, that's a great point,
a little bit,
honestly, because it does seem like after the Cold War, we seem like, democracy won in that sense, or won, I guess.
Fighting communism and stuff.
Right, yeah, but...
Oh, there was even articles about like the way future was only going to be liberal democracy. And even then, when it's a Japanese guy who made a very famous article, he called it The End of History. And it's an article called The End of History. And it's literally writing how, with the fall of communism, liberal democracy has essentially won, and capitalism, American capitalism style, has essentially won. I would definitely be hesitant to say that's the end of the matter. And that's exactly, and even then, people were writing counter arguments saying, "Oh, hold on," And this is the height of euphoria. America's number one. We're we're the number one. China's not even big yet. The Soviet Union's collapsed. There was a moment where the U.S. was literally just and when I was a kid in the 90s, just supreme. There was untouchable.
And Alex, I think it's so important to why we must pay attention to history. History is the best predictor of the future. And I think that's a huge part of this podcast, is that we talk about current events and how that relates to history and how it could turn out in the future. Like, I think that's one of the things that gives us a unique podcast, is we're going to always have that reference of history in anything we talk about.
Fantastic. I totally agree. And there's enough incidences in the late Republic that rhyme with what's happening now that I think it's very interesting to go into. And a lot of them are around reforms that senators wanted to have passed, but other senators opposed, therefore gridlocking the Senate. And that situation continued long enough until it got to a point that you had to have a Caesar type step in. Even though there was ones before Caesar. There was already people don't realize, but there's actually dictators that had already started to seize the Republic before Caesar. And they actually opened the door for him to even Caesar to do what he did. But that's why often, they say Trump is a dude. What if it's not actually Trump, but actually a person a generation or two later?
Yeah.
Or, what I mean? It just the start of this is they all think, oh, if Trump's not elected, it's the end of the whole thing. We don't need to reform. We don't need to improve. We don't need to do anything. We don't need to even worry about any demagogue populace. We do, because if we're not reforming and we're not passing laws, then we are eventually going to get to a point where we're going to ask one person to step in and do it. And
it's over.
People say that couldn't happen in America. They say it could happen in America because we're so democracy oriented. But I really think it's important to learn about Roman early Republic history. They were so anti-king that in a lot of ways they're more anti-king than we are. And they still ended up with a Caesar. Yeah. So, I think we should definitely remember.
And I would say we're a lot more consumer based, like a consumer country, more so than a democracy country. I feel like, our morals are more engraved into our wallets, I feel like.
You're right. Like as long as the goods and stuff are stable and our economy's growing, like I don't really care who's in charge, kind of thing.
Yeah, like almost an idiocracy type level, or just
Yeah, more than ancient Romans, Republican people who were supporting that. So it's actually more of a danger if we don't get our act together, facing a Caesar type of a scenario. Now, some people might want a Caesar to take over of the U.S., and I've thought about that before. Yeah. I think one thing that's important to remember about those incidents, like with Caesar's family, right? Augustus was the first emperor. He was a nephew of Caesar. I think it's important to remember that it's cool if you're on the winning side of that, and the royal family that you want to take over wins. But if you're on the opposite side of that, then you're facing ruin, unlike anything that a democracy would ruin you. So let's say like Trump loses, and his whole family would be destroyed, and Augustus's royal family takes control, right? Let's say we assume that it might be Trump who takes the kingship, right, of America. What if it's Hillary's or the Clintons? You see what I'm saying? I would not make my bets that it's going to be the person you want to be the royal king to take over. Usually it never works like you plan, like it's going to be that person. It's not how it's worked historically. It's such a mess that usually the Game of Thrones, somebody you totally didn't even expect ends up on top. And after all the others were slain, and
that's why we try to remove that out of the equation entirely. We should, that's why we should focus on the healing and keeping the republic healthy, because you might think, oh, you want a king in here, but what if it's the other side becomes the dynasty? Then you're facing much worse outcomes than if you would have stayed a republic.
True,
So
it's that great thing of people cheering when someone's freedom of speech is silenced until they come and silence yours.
Right, exactly. Like, let's just get rid of the Senate, until the Clintons become the dynasty, and then you're like, oh shit, that wasn't what I meant. Too late.
It's a cyclical conundrum.
And we are kind of dancing with it. I would say we're still pretty far. I think we forget, like, even in the Civil War, we said, oh, America's more divided than ever and everything. Has any senators caned another one recently in the Senate House? No. So we've actually been more divided, if we're actually being accurate, of course. We've been more divided before. But we are showing those signs of the late Republic things, of that if no one else can pass these laws and no reform can be made, something's going to do it. And we don't even want to dance to that. We don't even want to mess that. In my opinion, I would say let's not even look that way. Let's just look towards how we can fix this. For sure, to try to heal what's wrong. And I think when I talk to, I think we're all pretty moderate in general terms. We got our areas, but I think there's a lot actually that we can agree on.
I agree, yeah.
And it's just like those few sticking points.
And I think there's a lot more that the American people agree on than they're led to believe.
Right.
I totally agree. I
definitely
believe that.
A couple numbers. One, only half the country votes. So then you have half the country is the big political divide between a quarter of the country considering themselves Democrats, a quarter considering themselves Republicans. The other half doesn't even vote. And even among the voting parties, that half of the country, they have so much more in common than they believe too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, what percentage, Alex, you can look this up, is under the voting age of that total population number? I'm not exactly sure. But Alex, you can find that really quick. Yeah, there are going to be...
Oh, I mean, well, given that the average age of the United States, these are some figures a lot of people don't realize. The average age of the United States, you guys know what it is?
48.
It's like 30 something.
38. Yeah. But it's going quick. It's going up quickly. I think the highest in the world is like 48 or something like that. So, but that's the average person's age, So actually, the voting, that's the bulk of the voting, is around that age more than the youth or the old for that matter. But the really growing one is the old. And the thing that's important, I think, that has always been the case. It's not any new trend. Is of course the older people vote more consistently, more often, and far more in numbers than the youth always do. This is not some new trend. A lot of people try to paint it as like it's some millennial or that's nonsense. It's been the case always. The youth have other things going on, right? That's not their main priority. The older folks, their main priority is to maintain stability of their life, and frankly, they have less going on, so they got time to go down there and do it.
Yeah.
You could hate on me for that, but I still stand on that one. But regardless, as we age and as our demographics age, I think, like you said, if 50% are turning out, and then, that demographic is voting more of an older age, and then you really get to a point that a lot of extremists are the only ones voting, is my main point. Like a large percentage of, they're the only ones actually voting. We need to get a larger breadth out there, and I think immediately you would see more of what we're talking about.
I think a good chunk of voters are the people who who leave comments on Yelp. It's like, who goes out of their way to
Yeah.
leave the nasty
That
comments
personality
on
type.
Yelp?
Yeah.
They're the
Yeah,
same
no,
person
totally
who's
agree.
Goes
like
out of their
the
way.
loudest
Yeah.
on Facebook about politics. They're the
Right.
they're the ones who want to call the cops on their neighbor for playing music. It's and they're the ones who are making
On a
sure
Friday
that
night.
everybody's out there voting. Yeah, on a Friday night. It's not even Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah.
And when you close your window, you can't even hear their music.
Yeah.
You just happen to take out the trash and you heard their music.
Yeah, that was exactly. It's for example, like those are the ones who are needling things and much more than the rest, and as a result, it's like, well, they're the ones who don't compromise. Just like you can't compromise on a Friday night, man. Come on.
Yeah, so and I
Yeah.
think, and here's one of the things that I told one of my like very conservative buddies. I said, I want to vote for RFK, and he said, well, he said that he's like willing for abortion, and you're not for abortion. I'm like, well, true, but that technically doesn't have to do with our president. That's the Supreme Court issue. So therefore, I don't mind. And I think too many people conflate Supreme Court issues with the president. Yes, he gets to potentially nominate 1, 2, or most likely 0 Supreme Court justices, depending on what president it is.
Right.
So then they won't even make an impact on the Supreme Court if they don't even have the ability to make a nomination. So it's like, if any subject that is going to have to do with the Supreme Court, I don't even look at that as what their stance is as the president, because of the likelihood of them changing X amount of votes is none. Trump got lucky that he had 2. He got so lucky that he had 2 nominees. Biden's going to have 1 with Ruth Gill, unless they do that. I forget what it's called, where it's pushed off. But I think of the ones that are president and Congress, those policies that people vote on that they have in place, I think the American people are so close to actually being on the same page, is my whole point of that.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And there's many of those that are like social issues that shouldn't require legislation, and we're like just leaving it to the politicians to solve. That should not be something. Now, abortion might be one of those that is, but there's a lot of them that don't need legislation or shouldn't require that much of it, and we're forcing it on the hands. I think when it comes to the Supreme Court, there's an issue of often it's just a matter of luck that a president could have, a bunch of them could have 0. It's like, to make it some politicized thing about who gets appointed, it's really just the luck of the draw. Yeah. It just, the fact that Trump got lucky had nothing to do with like suddenly the system's rigged.
Totally.
It's not rigged. It just, that's how. There's also some strategy in that. However, I distinctly remember there was a debate within the Democrats about when Obama was ending his term. Ruth Bader Ginsburg could have stepped down and he could have appointed another one then. Instead, she died during Trump's term. So that actually created a scenario where he was given the opportunity that they could have, instead of, and everyone, she assured everybody she was fine. And the Democrats said, that's the thing where their strategy failed. And then they turned around and blamed it on some kind of rigging of the system. I still distinctly remember they had discussed it. So it wasn't any surprise.
Dude, I still to this day hear people on the left like kind of curse Ruth Bader Ginsburg's name for doing that, like
because of that. Right, and she refused to. Yeah, I believe the reason why is that she refused to, but strategically it did cost him pretty dearly because she just happened. Like, you can't predict when you're going to die because I don't know, so it just happened that way. And now he suddenly had 2 instead of perhaps only 1.
That kind of leads us to another topic of term limits and how we shouldn't have
age.
We shouldn't have
age, dude. What
people running?
I look around the Senate
and
dude, oh my god,
not like against elders or anything like that. I'm just saying that we need a bigger, pool of people in there. I think. I don't understand.
See,
it's crazy.
So I believe if we had term limits, going back to something we were mentioning earlier about when politicians are too buddy and only doing what's the best interest for them and their constituents and their lobbyists and military industrial complex, big pharma, big business, whatever one you feel like they're entangled with, I think it prevents a lot of that. if you have term limit,
Absolutely.
it doesn't allow them to form the fraternity because too many people are in and out, and they're trying to serve the people who elected them and what's going on in their state and their district versus I've been doing the same thing for 33 years and no one gives a fuck.
Yeah. And I'm
in DC.
Yeah, I'm in this little clique and nobody's, and exactly.
Like when Lindsey Graham got all butthurt that McCarthy got kicked out of being in the House, he went to Twitter and was like, we were so close to building this wall. And it's like, so you mean the last 20 years you couldn't do anything and you were just that close?
Exactly.
You were just that close to solving all of the problems
almost there,
until
guys.
he got kicked out?
Yeah.
No, it's like, how about you
almost there, guys.
what you were supposed to do all those times before?
Mm-hmm.
And go back home to your the people who elected you, and work with them back home.
And you have people like them, like just there's a number of Democrats and Republicans who are just so powerful that you can't run against them, whether you're of the same party or the opposite party in their areas. They just have too much money.
Mm-hmm.
You can't beat them. So then they're in there for 30 years. Like Dianne Feinstein, like where she's from, served over 30 years.
And
California.
That's a great example. Like they had been talking about the issues she had been having doing her job leading up to her death.
Oh.
And it's just like, you really have to wonder, besides the amount of power she had accumulated in that position, she was not at that point in any way for probably at least 10 years qualified to be in that job. So we had a person who is in one of the most important positions in our country be incompetent for 10 years, at least. I mean, we could argue more, but I'm going to say at least that. What a huge waste of resources, of time, of our, political patience, the American people's political patience, because very little got done during that decade of incompetence.
Trust of the government.
Trust, the feeling of the trust that this person is incompetent and still in office. And if I was at my job, would I still be there? No, not even remotely. So I would be fired. So all of us feel that same lack of justice. Like in our jobs, if we're incompetent, we get let go. But apparently, in one of the most important jobs, you don't. And we can't but feel frustrated and angry and like we're not getting justice.
I agree.
Period. At the end of the day, from these kind of things. And really, the bummer is like you really can't see any logical reason pretty quickly why they shouldn't put age limits on the senators. Like I really don't see why. I've seen no
logical reason, but you can see why, or you can probably kind of draw conclusions of why they're not doing or even talking about it. I've never even heard any kind of congressional meeting about age limits or age term limits or anything like that.
Not from the actual Senate. Everyone else is talking about it, but they're. It has become the white elephant, as far as I'm concerned, in the Senate. They pretend like it doesn't exist. There's a giant elephant in the room, and they don't even. I don't even know what you're talking about. I don't even. I'm not even going to address this elephant because it's invisible. So, but it totally is. I mean, they clearly, for her to pass away in office like this is just like the whole thing is just wow.
Almost.
So
yeah, huge amounts of resources and time wasted to me.
I feel like so many politicians are taking a page out of Justice William Douglas. He was a former Supreme Court justice. He had a quote, "Even if I die, keep me up and voting. Keep me sitting up and voting."
Mm-hmm. Oh, exactly. And that's why I feel like she was that for last 10 years at least. Like that she was.
Did you see the videos of she was it was like a C-SPAN video, and she was voting on a bill or something, and then the Congress members around her would be like, just vote yes. Just vote yes. She's like, I don't know what I'm reading. And she's like, just vote yes. And they're like, okay, vote yes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the hell is going on with our country right now? Like, what?
This is not a job where you're stamping a stamp to give to somebody. This is like a seriously important job, and your aides are telling you you're not sorting mail. This is like the most important job in the country, and your aides, some 25-year-old aide is telling you how to vote.
Yeah.
I
saw the video,
and you're the most important
with the aide. Danger coming up and whispering to her, like, no, this is what we want. We need you to do.
Yeah. What? And you can imagine the kind of coaching done off camera. You can only imagine the type of coaching that they engage in off camera. They probably stage everything down to the point for her, so it gives the illusion that she's competent in her own mind. But literally,
she doesn't know what that was going on.
she isn't at all, and she's literally propped up like the dude said. Like if I die, just like prop me up, and like
And
I feel
keep
like
me voting.
there's so many of these.
Yep.
The thing that's weird don't you think something so important should be far more discussed in not even just mainstream media, but like all media, and then also just amongst people in general,
Yeah.
Americans? Like we
You
should
think?
be discussing that. Perhaps just maybe part of the issues we're having is that we have so many people over 70 and 80 in the most powerful positions of
Mhm.
government in our
That
country.
and they don't understand the basic concepts of like internet and network, connectivity and all
Right.
that stuff. So it's like,
That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Not to go on a tangent, but do you remember the hearing with TikTok? And we had
Yes.
we had one of the committee members are like, "Do you guys connect to their Wi-Fi routers?" And he was like, I don't understand the
The
question.
Facebook one.
Do you guys connect to their Wi-Fi routers in the homes of Americans?
Dude, that was so
And he's like,
embarrassing.
I mean,
Like-
that's how we connect to the internet. Everybody
Yeah.
does that.
You can't not do that, buddy. I don't know if
I don't know if you know what the internet is, but yeah.
Is this a trick question?
Yeah.
And in that dude's mind, honestly, without being coached by his aides and young people, he would be thinking it's time to dial up. Like they could just dial up and do AOL or something then apparently, because literally you would have to know the fundamentals. And most of us do. Like, are you guys IT specialists? No. Do you know that everyone has to connect to a router? Yes. That's the difference between a 70-year-old and
Right.
the 30-year-old or whatever. Is the fundamentals need to be there. And we're talking about in an economy where didn't NVIDIA just pass also the 1 trillion club? So literally all the biggest levers of our economy are all tech.
Absolutely.
And these guys are all 70 and 80 and have very little even grasp of technology. Is there not at its core a major problem there? You got
something
two
sick going on. Yeah.
Dude,
they're like totally at odds. And you're like, wow, how can we get anything done then? Really?
It's actually amazing that we do get anything done, to be honest.
It's amazing we do in this environment of propped up elderly people being voted, choosing, told how to vote, and the fact that they have no knowledge of tech in an economy that actually is very vital to the flourishing of our economy. So it's totally stunning that this isn't more top news. Actually, it's weird to me. Yeah.
Well, that's
not
why
more
I was
discussed
kind of
about.
alluding to like the thing where Americans are more consumer based, where we're kind of blinded by the consumerism of it all. We just don't care as long as we get our
For
iPhones
sure.
and all that stuff. So
watching football.
In foreign policy and And I love that about Americans. As a history guy and stuff, and geography is super important to me and stuff. But there is kind of like that joke in a lot of parts of the world that like Americans have no concept of geography or history or anything, and they don't care about anything besides like their little bubble and their own American history. And I think it's like always though, it's great. There's Americans that are absolutely brilliant with the knowledge of the world, and they're absolutely some of the best professors and the best people in those fields are Americans. But the part of American culture is to consume, and so therefore your main focus would be more on the football than.
But how do we get those bright minds in office versus the same fucking people?
I agree. And
where's
the incentive? How do we bring about an incentive to both get our teachers to actually want to teach kids and get our Congress members to actually want to work and pass laws?
Yeah. That's where I do love Americans, but I do have to criticize them, and I take a lot of flack from a lot of people for us. Is like, if you just didn't even look up the policies on any side and he just had Bush in his name and then you vote, then that's part of the problem. It's not just the politicians. You are part of the problem if you don't, like people I talk to, they say that they just vote and they didn't even look up any of the issues and they just made sure it had an RD next to it. That's not acceptable. That's simply, if you want to know why these people there should not be in office and are completely unable to be in office,
right there.
That's because the power around their name just now becomes a thing. We have to take the time off of our football game or whatever we're doing to at least learn about our state's politicians that we're now going to put in office and who are going to make decisions that affect us. There's a disconnect there. Of course, there's a big disconnect, but we have to really emphasize that it's more connected than we think, because then we're super pissed later they make policies that affect us big time. And we just voted. We didn't think about it. We didn't look up their views. We didn't do anything. We just, that's Bush. And I was like, what are you guys doing? So
Yeah. And then when you
crazy.
turn on the TV really quick, you're like, oh man, Hamas is finally taking back their land. And people in the media
if
and the media goes, yep, they're taking back their land. And it's like,
fire.
what?
Oh, so you just wanted to blow up this whole podcast and just get us all banned?
Coming in hot.
You know, it's
That's a good way to switch tangents.
Switching tangents on us. Because
it is though, but it does have the fundamental issue that we need to learn these concepts. We need to take the time. Like there's that we need to take the time to learn. Because people are schooling us. People are schooling us if we don't learn. And it's not just about they're mocking us Americans that we don't know our shit. We need to know our shit.
One thing that this whole conflict has taught me is that there's so many complexities that go along with these conflicts. And this is just one little section of the world. I mean, I guess not little. It's relatively little, you know what I mean? But so it's
smaller
so
than
many
New Jersey.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, it's a pretty small section of the world relative to what else is going on there. But just this one little area has so much history and so much complexities that it's so you have to be paying attention quite a bit to be able to understand what's going on.
I think I have seen before. It's like it's about the size of Washoe County.
That's insane.
So all this stuff.
That's insane.
Yeah, and Ty, correct me if I'm wrong. When that Sunday when Hamas originally attacked Israel, you sent a text in our group chat. And I couldn't tell if it was a question or statement or what, but you were like, I feel bad because I'm being told that their land was taken from them. You were because something you saw said that Israel took the land from Palestine.
They both seem to have that kind of story. Is the thing is that they both seem to have this kind of like savior or colonizer, or I wouldn't say colonizer. You know what I'm saying, like an attacker invader versus a savior kind of thing. So
that's the worst problems, political and violence in the world is where both are perceived as both the aggressor and the victim. And this is that classic case where both think they have equal claim to it and both perceive the other as the monster and both are the victim. In that environment, how could you win? Because there's both, if you're both victims, then, they're both monsters.
I think that's why the fog of war is so dense in this kind of conflict, is because they can both kind of play on that card so easily, and especially with media being such a huge overreach or a huge networking ability. For sure. Yeah, that's a good that's a good switch up in terms of like the knowledge of that, because if we're just going to depend on a name like Bush to vote or Feinstein to vote and not look their policies up, and if we're also just going to rely on the news to tell us that it's their land that it was taken, I think that's what the point you're kind of getting to, right? It's like that's the problem. It's like if we didn't know it for ourselves, if we didn't educate our history ourselves about that region, and we're doing that classic oblivious America outside of America thing, then they can then game us and tell us, oh, they're taking their land. It's not factual actions at all, but they could tell you that, and then you start to, without your own knowledge base, you start to buy into that. Pretty soon you're ruining your career, confused.
Writing letters to. You're very confused.
You're just one confused person. Yeah, I think that's.
But in that context, we should go back to
Let's go through the history.
The history of it. Yeah, the history of it. Yeah. So I have here a quote I'd like to read you guys. This is from the first time. So there's two Jewish temples that have been destroyed. There's the Temple of Solomon. This was known as the foot pedal of God. This is where the connection to God and Israelis was the strongest. And so it was obviously a very holy site, very sacred to them. So the first one to destroy it was the Babylonians. And so the Babylonians actually, were the first to destroy the first temple. And that was important because that was the first scattering of Jews away from it. But it wasn't the one that defines our current thing. And that's why it's important to know that, because people can try to game the system and say, oh, but they didn't actually expel you if you're just going by this one and you're not going by the other one. So I'll read this one now. So let's see. So it starts here. The siege lasted 2 years. It was accompanied, according to Josephus, by a famine and temper. It was a famine that finally brought an end to the siege. In 587, this is BC. So in 587 BC, Zedekiah, who was the king of Judah at the time, had had enough. He tried to escape, apparently without thought for the rest of the people, left behind to face Babylonian wrath. The famine had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden. They fled towards the Jordanian valley, but the Babylon army pursued them and captured all of them. Now Nebuchadnezzar, normally free from the gratuitous cruelty that had characterized the kings of Assyria, had been exasperated into vengeance. And the reason is because basically he had gave Zedekiah back control of his king a couple of times now, and Zedekiah kept rebelling. So he came back again this time, and he was like, I'm not going to have any of it. It's a done deal. When Zedekiah was hauled in front of him, this is the king of Judah, was hauled in front of him, in front of Nebuchadnezzar, he ordered the king's sons, still children, killed in front of his eyes, and then had Zedekiah's eyes put out, so that the last sight he had ever witnessed was the execution of his family. Then Nebuchadnezzar ordered his commander to set Jerusalem on fire. The walls were broken down, the city's people were marched off into exile, the palace of the king, the houses, the treasury, and the temple of Solomon were all in flames. The Jews were resettled all over Babylon, and some fled down to Egypt, which is where the story starts of, the splitting of the Red Sea and the Moses.
Yep.
So that's what's actually started that. So the Jews were resettled all over Babylon. Some fled to Egypt. It was the beginning of a diaspora which lasted for 2 millennia. And after this manner have the kings of David's race ended their lives. And that was the first story of the sacking of the temple, which was Babylonians. But I think we should take a step here. There was no real concept of the modern Arab, or this was literally 1,000+ years away from any concept of a Muslim. So any of the two of the rival parties in this discussion, there is no modern Babylonian people. There is no modern Babylonian nation. Right. So who do you blame for that? The people who are of that people and ethnic group are no longer in that region. So that's the first big problem with that, is to say that it was the Palestinians or Arabs that originally drove them from there is not correct either.
Was there any instances that happened from this first driving out that like kind of set up anything, or did it just set up for the next kind of conflict?
Well, thankfully, what happened next is they were driven from the region, and a bunch were settled into Babylon, and then also some went to Egypt, right? Then there's that story. Eventually, the Jews collected themselves back through a series of events like that happened in Egypt that's told by, I believe, Moses, and as well as the Persian king, Cyrus the Great. It was actually famous in Jewish scripture for saying when he took control, he actually let the Jews go back to Israel and Jerusalem and allowed them to build the second temple.
Gotcha.
So it's actually really important to know that even though Persia controlled the land now, that was Judah, the Persian Empire, they allowed the Jews to move back to Israel, modern Israel, the land that it is, and build the second temple. So the second temple was how that was built. And so Cyrus the Great, I mean, he was considered like a Messiah. He was like considered a great savior of the Jewish people. And on a side note, that's interesting is I suggest you guys actually type a hashtag in Twitter. It's Iranians in support of Israel. And a lot of people don't realize, because Iran's government is so against and so anti-Israeli, that many of the Iranians who were forced out from the 1979 revolution and are now all around the world and like in America and stuff, they are very much against that government, right? And so they're actually very much in support of the Israeli government against the type of Islamism that destroyed their country in their current form. And so actually, it's actually surprising. You'd be surprised the amount of support that Iranians outside of Iran support Israel, and that's just an interesting connection because Cyrus, Persian is essentially Iranian,
gotcha.
so it's the
So
modern
where
Iran is.
Where did that divide come in from the government to its people in that sense?
Well, I mean, the Iranian government that seized control in 1979 is probably the most religiously minded Islamic government that's in office currently. The only one that would exist that's more radical would be ISIS when they controlled their territory. So now they're on different sides of Islam, Sunni and Shia, but the basically an extremist religious group took over the Iranian government.
I see.
So
I do remember.
that's why.
Okay, I recall this.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I understand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the Persian takeover was 500 years BC. And then now if we fast forward
more or less
to 70 years BC is when the Roman Empire
that's right.
then took back over that same area.
That same area, yes. And yep, exactly. That's now again, you got to keep in mind this whole time period, the actual independence of Israel and Judah was very limited. Most of the time, they were under one empire or another, this region. So it's important to remember that. But now, before we do that, before we go any farther than this, though, we should point out that before the Babylonian sacking, there was literally centuries and centuries where Israel was independent. It was its own kingdom. And frankly, this area was a patch of desert that nobody wanted. So it's the most important fought over piece of land now. But in the founding and for most of ancient Israel's history and the Jewish founding people's history, this was not highly sought after and was just like a corner of a desert patch that nobody wanted. They lived there, but they were absolutely one of the first people who lived there because, again, it wasn't highly sought after. It wasn't a central power of any empire or anything like that. So
yeah, we have.
But yeah, now moving forward to Roman times.
Yeah, so in the Torah, it is mentioned. Israel is mentioned 600 times in the Torah. And you can say however old an historian wants to think the Torah is, but there is no argument that 3,500 years ago, that was Israel.
Right.
Now, someone could say 6,000 years ago, it was still Israel, but there's no argument about 3,005 years. 3,500 years ago.
That's
it was
an
Israel.
important distinguishment because we all kind of frame it in more modern sense as like after World War II. I feel like most people kind of frame their mental, it's like, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the 3,500 years ago really sets the stage of why it was Israel, and then until the Persian Empire took over 500 BC,
Yeah, first the Babylonians, then the Persians, then the Romans. And essentially, though, 587, 587 to that quote I just read you, it's important to remember that that documentation was on record from both not just the Jewish kingdoms kept record, but also the Babylonian records have. So my point is that even outside people had records of a state called Israel and Judah that long ago. So that's pretty undisputable. And I would say it's bordering on propaganda, and it is essentially, if you're saying that they didn't have a state here in that region in ancient times.
Because you can confirm it's
not
those outside sources. It's not just
from multiple sources. Right. Yeah, not just not just their paperwork. Exactly. It's not just their paperwork. It's the regional people who had no stake in it. Egypt would love to take over that land. They still wrote down that there was a kingdom there. The Babylonians, obviously, they did take it. They kept a record as well. So you have many sources, saying that they were there.
And then I'm going to fast forward because then you have the Roman Empire, and then the Ottoman Empire came in the early 1500s. And then after World War I came the British taking over that area. And so...
Was it just the British? I thought it was all of like the Allied powers, in a sense, kind of had a say in that.
After World War I.
World War I?
It was British controlled.
Gotcha.
And then after World War II is when it was given to the own state of Israel. But in no time from 3,500 years ago till 1948 was there a nation state called Palestine.
Right. And that's where we should back it up to the Roman Jewish thing, because that's exactly where that happens. And that also shows that really, though, the problem of the naming has little to do with the Arabs or anything at all. And so
Mhm.
they're essentially taking on the name of a Roman province and calling themselves the name of a Roman province. And so that's neither Arab nor Muslim. It's literally the name of the region that the Romans named it, and has little to do with any kind of ethnogenesis of their own people in any way. So the first one was the first. There was three major wars with the Jews in Rome and the region, and the first one was where the second Jewish temple was destroyed in the first war, right? And the reason why that's important is because literally today there's pictures you can see. If you know in Jerusalem they're praying to that western wall and they're like moving back and forth like this, and they have the thing. That's just a little remnant of that temple. So it's called the Western Wall, and it's just a little section that remains of what was once a giant temple. And so that's what they worship. And so that's why when they say like, oh, like, why is it so holy? Why do they need access to it? You know, why is it so important to them? Essentially, their original temple to God was destroyed. And so all they have left is like this little section of it. And that's why it's so holy to them and why it's such a contentious point. Now, I think it's important to remember that when the Muslims came around and conquered the region, they built a mosque right on top of it. Now, to be fair, so did the Christians. So the Christians and the Muslims both built religious churches and mosques on top of, called the Dome of the Rock, and I think it's Saint. I can't remember. I'm sorry, but there's two buildings that are adjacent to the Western Wall that are built by the other major faiths that controlled the region first. And so that's why, so literally everyone has a stake in that same exact spot. That's why they're literally that same exact spot.
And for time frame of what Alex is talking about, when the Muslims came around, was 600 years after the Romans and the Jews were going to war.
Right.
600 years later,
yes,
is when you had your first
600
Muslims
years
pop
later.
up.
Yeah. So the Romans destroyed the temple, and then 600 years later, the Muslims showed up. So it wasn't the Muslims had no stake in it; they had no part in it, but they also had no reason to do that either, and so they had no part in the destruction of the temple. The Romans at this time were not Christian, so it is important. I want to make that distinction. Rome converted later in general in waves. At this point, they were generally pagan and Jupiter, stuff like that. So they had they also had no stake in destroying the temple for some kind of religious sake. For them, it was literally like they destroyed everything in Jerusalem because they were this riot was such a hassle for them. Now, I just want to speed real quick to the second one, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people know about that one. That's actually very famous. The first Jewish-Roman War. The second one is the Bar Kokhba Revolt. And it's the third war of the Jewish-Roman wars. And this is the one where the Romans had just had enough. They literally, after this time, they enslaved and killed every Jew that they could in the region and pushed them out. Then they actually enacted a decree that no Jews could actually live there full time in the region. They also renamed the region Palestine. That was the depth of how much trouble they had caused them, that they now had literally re-changed the name of the land, forced the original inhabitants of the land not to live there anymore, literally on pain of death. They were allowed to come back once a year for a religious ceremony, but they literally couldn't live in Jerusalem. So the actual starting point of where Jews were banned from their land was this one, which was in 136.
Wow, that's
AD.
insane.
That was literally the event, which is far less known because most people focus on the destroying of the second temple because it's so traumatic. And like a lot of even like Jewish holidays are centered. I believe even Hanukkah and stuff is about the destroying of the second temple. So it's I could be wrong there. I'm sorry if I'm wrong, but the main thing that really caused the issue today was the Romans took it over, renamed it entirely from this event, and then banned them. And actually, when Rome turned into Christian, became majority Christian, and became the predominant Christian, the Christian emperors decided to continue that. So that is important to point out that they could have allowed them at some point to come back. But at this point, it had taken on a religious tone of its own and things like that. So they had said no Jews could come back to actual Jerusalem. And that was when it really began.
So the main reason why they didn't want them to come back was because of how like fervorous the rebellions were with the Jewish.
Yeah, the rebellions, the Romans are used to putting down rebellions, but every one of these was met with untold, unprecedented destruction and problems for them, especially the first one. That first one where they destroyed the Second Temple, the Romans, I believe, lost 2 or 3 legions, whole legions to them. That's also where, this war is also where the word of a zealot comes from, because there was a Jewish party, a group of Jewish people who were so fanatical that they they were religious fanatics, and the whole concept of today's religious fanaticism is built in a way from these.
And that's what kind of led to just that, that complete disregard for their kind of religious stance and wouldn't let them come back.
For sure. And the Romans in other cases had done it before, so it's not like it was unique just to Jews or Jerusalem. If a province gave them too much trouble, they would destroy a lot of its original essence, and that's essentially what happened here to the Romans at the time. It was nothing, they were just destroying another rebellious province that was causing trouble for them. Later on, though, they could have reversed it, but it then became kind of like a concept. Keep the Jews from the Holy Land was a concept in itself that suddenly took on a life of its own, and so for the next 2,000 years began the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora. So, that's where that came from. But,
Gotcha. So then we're up to the Second Roman Jewish War, right?
Yeah, well, I would say, we're up to that. The Bar Kokhba revolt was the final straw. That was when literally Judah was renamed to Palestine as a province. And it was combined with a few other areas around modern Israel and Judah, but that's where the name Palestine came from, was a Roman name put onto the land. So ancient Rome no longer exists, and the Roman ethnic of that time doesn't exist. So who do you blame for that?
So do we know the Muslim settlers? Like, what was the group of Muslim settlers that settled in the Palestine?
Yeah, essentially, originally that region had been, for that, up until that, like Jesse was saying, that 600 years when the Muslims showed up, this region, instead, Palestine was filled with Greeks and Christians. So the Jews had been expelled from the region, and largely Christians and Greeks and stuff had lived there. Then the Muslims came and took that, and they just essentially did the same thing that these Greeks, Christians did. They settled there, they built lives there, they built communities there. And that is what, in my opinion, is what represents the Palestinians of today. It's Muslim settlers who are Arab Muslim settlers to a region called Palestine that was named by the Romans. And
interesting.
So, but none of it is they're not Palestinian. Ancient Rome named that as a province.
Yeah, and there were groups of Jews who never left as well.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah. But not in significant numbers, though. Most of them, the vast majority were expelled. There was a few like religious leaders, but
so you could say before it was ever Palestine and before Muslims even entered it, you could almost say it was a melting pot of people.
For sure, yeah.
Because then
I think though, like there was very few Jews though. I do have to that part of the Roman policy was like literally Jews can't live here anymore. So. And it was so there might have been a few and like religious leaders exceptions maybe and things like that, but the region's always been a melting pot in terms of people coming from North Africa, Europe, and Asia. But in terms of there was actually no significant Jewish population for the next 2,000 years in this region. Wow. So I think that's part of why the context of the modern state of Israel was created. Was because they were not allowed to live in that land. Why didn't they go back sooner, essentially?
Yeah.
And because the Muslims, however, had much more lenient, and there was already Jews coming back to Jerusalem and Israel before modern times. So centuries and centuries ago, they were already moving in small numbers there.
Gotcha.
But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So you're right though. You're totally right. Because the Muslims allowed people to come back and stuff like that, even though there was a general limit on how many could move and what they could do in terms of religious freedom, you're right. It was like a melting pot.
And then the Ottoman Empire came in the early 1500s. They took over.
Which is a Muslim thing.
Yeah.
And also at the height of their empire also took control of, a lot of people don't know, is they actually took control of the caliphate. So they took the mantle of the caliphate. So in every way, they represented Islam and could have made the choices of Islam's choices in regards to Judaism.
Interesting.
And then I don't know if there's anything in between that and World War One that is notable.
Essentially, for centuries at that point, there had been Jews communities moving to Jerusalem and Judea, but they were in Israel, but they were firmly under the control of the Ottoman state. So they weren't some independent entity or anything. It was part of the Ottoman Empire. Israel, modern Israel, was part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans had an interesting concept where essentially they often allowed the regional communities to run themselves, but it was all based on religion. So your religion could allow like certain individual communities to run a lot of things, and then the Ottomans held the utmost political power, but you could do a lot of stuff on an individual regional level. And so compared to the issues that Jews were facing in Europe of the pogroms and anti-Semitism, it was often easier for a lot of them to go to the Middle East at this point, leading up to World War One, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of people totally think that Muslims and Jews were always enemies. Actually, I would say for the last 500 years at least, Muslims and Jews got on better than Christians and Jews. And that dynamic has only shifted recently with the dynamics of the Middle East to geopolitics. But in terms of, many Jews were actually going to the Muslim world. And to us, that seems crazy, but that's what was actually happening.
Wow.
So they were fleeing Europe.
That's crazy. So then we're up to, are we getting close to modern times then? From the 1600s?
Yes, because the word pogrom comes from the Russian. It's actually so the Nazis were so ridiculous that they completely obscured the fact that actually a lot of the worst anti-Semitism violence was in the Russian Empire, and it was so bad that they literally coined the term pogrom. Comes from within the Russian Empire, there would just be these attacks on Jewish communities and slaughterings of Jewish communities. So that's what I mean. Is those kind of events were happening. Then some of those Jews would decide to go to the Ottoman Empire and settle, and it wasn't always in Israel. Jews were settling in other parts of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
It wasn't just they weren't just concentrating there. Is my point. You'd have plenty of Jews in Istanbul, for example. The capital of the Ottoman Empire. So you have whole Jewish communities in the Ottoman in Istanbul and all throughout the Ottoman Empire. You'd have Christian and Jewish communities, somewhat.
What a contrast to modern times. That's insane.
Yeah, we forget so quickly that first the Nazis replaced but the Russians were actually so bad that that's where the actual term came from, is of a pogrom, which is like a specifically ethnic, a violent attack on a specific ethnic group, or and so that's where that came from.
What a crazy just mess of so many different stories and all this, all these events. It's insane how, just this one little area of all those complexities. It's insane.
But you're right. Once the British took over, they started to allow basically anyone who wanted to come there to come now. And the British mandate allowed them. And so the Jews came in huge numbers. They came in pretty good numbers before pre-World War II, and then they came in floods after World War II, obviously. But they were already, it is important to point out, they were already coming before World War II. There was already movements that a lot of people disliked within the communities and in Europe about this movement to go to Jerusalem, this Jewish movement to found the new state of Israel. And so that was already in the mix pre-World War II. But obviously, World War II created the dynamic of
what we see today,
making it a reality.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The British had control of the region after that, and they totally bungled up the situation and basically allowed the tensions to grow to maximum, similar to what they did in India and Pakistan, and then
they
just left.
Right?
Like, okay, we're
like,
gonna let it.
we can't fight you, and we can't fight you either. So we're just gonna get out of here. I saw something about that. I was like, wow, that's a great way to handle that. I like it.
Yeah, it was absolutely, and I think it's as bad as it is. It is fair. I don't think it's it's like one of those things with the ISIS stuff. Is the British didn't invent this problem, but they allowed it to get as bad as it is. You let the tension and the problems rack up to maximum, and then you bail, and then they have to fight it out. Yeah. So it's like you made it worse, but certainly you didn't. The British didn't invent Jews and Muslims, but they did invent
stoke the flames. But,
a dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
They stoked the flames. Yeah. Exactly. They stoked the flames and caused it, making it all the worse, for sure. So, yeah, to sum up, Judah and Israel were a kingdom in that land long before even Muslims was a thing. So just to point out, even before there was Islam existed, there was a state of Israel there, thousands of years before that. Islam is actually the youngest of the three major religions, Abrahamic religions. Jewish is the oldest, Christianity is second oldest, Islam is the youngest. A lot of people assume, they just associate the Middle East, with how ancient it is. And they just I'm surprised how many people tell me I thought Islam was the oldest. It's actually the youngest of the three, and by a considerable amount. And the Muslims there are really settlers and are not ethnogenic people of people called Palestinian. They just took the name of the province that they lived in, more or less.
Yeah. And back to the 1948, what people say that Israel that land was taken, and it's like, but who was it taken from? There was no nation state. There was no president. It wasn't like China came in and said, we're taking Texas. It's like, well, no, because that's part of the United States.
Right. This is the tricky part, So you have these Palestinians who have been living here. They're just settlers. They're not some people who have been here for thousands of years, right? And now you got to remember the Jews have been expelled from their homeland. So the Jews have been expelled from the homeland, and it's essentially like there's people living in your homeland. And then, so there's people who, they own all the land, they run all the businesses, they control everything, including the Western Wall and who can go there. And so the Jews start coming in huge numbers, and then they start taking control of a lot of this stuff. And so it's like if the homeland people wanted their homeland back. And so that is the really tricky part. Technically, is the Palestinians' land been taken? Well, in a sense, yes. But if you were already not the people who was the people of that land. So it's kind of like you've settled on someone else's homeland, and now you are saying that your land's been taken. Well, I mean, you settled on somebody else's homeland, so you're going to have to compromise. And I think that's the problem is they don't even want to compromise. It's, many of their videos say Jews to the sea, Israel from the sea to the river. They have to remove them all. It's the fact that you came to somebody, you've been living in someone else's homeland. Now the people want their homeland back, and you're crying that they took your land. Well, technically they did, but also it's not your land. Really.
It's like if you go on vacation and you Airbnb your house, and when you're ready to come back from vacation, the Airbnb renter says, I'm squatting, I'm staying. And it's like, wait. I'm back. And here's another thing that's going to ruffle some feathers. And if I have any of this wrong in my theory, Alex, feel free to correct me. I want to ask people, what is a Palestinian? Because if you want to claim that you're a Muslim, all good. If you want to claim that you're a Jew, because there's a Jew from a nationality standpoint and a religious standpoint. But if you want to claim you're a Mexican from Mexico, totally get it. If you want to claim something off of religious beliefs or nationality beliefs. But what's a Palestinian? There was
For sure.
There
Exactly.
was no, has not, in a historical aspect like Russia, China, been a nation state that people are like, well, this is what I am because this is what I've always been. You are a
Right.
smorgasbord of something else, and and down in your lineage, you're probably fucking got some Jewish in there. You probably got some Italian in there, or some Greek in there, and you've got all this other stuff in there from all these other people who have been there. So there isn't something where
Oh
you
yeah.
can just
There's no pure.
where you
There's no
hold
pure
on
blood
to this
or any. Yeah.
Palestinian thing that's that's made up by a whole nother group of people, because there's the Greeks came up with the word, and then there was terminology like a heathen enemy or an unfleeing foe that people said was the definition of the word Palestine, or Philista, or however you pronounce it in Hebrew and in Greek.
Right. I mean, dude, it's really actually really simple. The modern concept is, and it's example of the level of propaganda. Really, no one was talking about Palestinians. They were talking about Arabs. So all up until recently, they were just talking about Arab people that lived in the province of Palestine. So when we call, I don't even know what to call a Palestinian in that sense, because they've created like a new ethnic identity. But for most of history, they would just be Arabs who lived in the province of Palestine. That's it.
Yeah.
They're Arabs. That's it. And Muslim Arabs that lived in Palestine. They now try to recreate this concept like there's a Palestinian nationhood, but essentially they were Arabs who lived in that province, and now they've created a new identity called Palestine.
Exactly. This whole new identity. It's like, but where did it originate from? Like where, I guess, are your people from originally?
Muslim Arabs.
Exactly.
They're Muslim
and
Arabs.
That's one of the things.
Without
I'm totally cool if you want to say we're Muslim people and not, but you're having this staking your flag in the ground of saying like we're Palestinians, and it's like, well, is that a thing? And I know some people are going to get pissed.
It's Oh, for sure. I mean, we're going to get total cancel cultured over this. But the Muslim Arabs are the Palestinian people, and they're one and the same. That is where this whole thing comes from. If you're talking about the ethnogenesis of Palestinians, they're Arabs. Well, it's not some unique Palestine thing.
And that's, I feel like, so many of these Palestinian groups on college campuses, that's what they're rallying around, though. They're like, you're taking these small groups of people and their land, and here's some law.
Their original homeland.
And here's some things that people don't realize. Yeah. Muslims are allowed to travel freely inside of Israel any point they want. It is illegal for Jews to go into parts of Palestine and Gaza. Illegal. They can't.
Right. I mean, yeah, there's restrictions within the state.
Anywhere they want in Israel.
But And to really, in that same sense, to be accurate about, like, if the college students getting upset, if they're talking about if the Palestinians want their state back, then actually they should go to Saudi Arabia. They should go to Arabia, because that's their homeland. So if you're talking about actually an ethnogenesis in terms of that, then their ethnogenesis homeland is Arabia. So them saying that is their homeland is where the problem becomes an issue, because no, that's actually the Israelis' homeland, based on thousands of years of history. But if we're looking at thousands of years of Arab history, then Arabia is their homeland by definition. So the emotional outpouring saying that they're stealing their homeland is literally propaganda, in the sense that literally their homeland ethnogenically is Arabia. So it's not Jerusalem.
So when did this idea of like a unified Palestine come from? Was it after World War II? Did this idea come
Well, it's because leading up to the events in 1948, I mean, Jews would either buy money. They just came with lots of money that they had accumulated in the West and stuff, and they would literally buy up lots of tracts of previously Muslim Arab land. So then it got to a point where the Ottoman authorities were wanting to demand that they give up some of that stuff, and the Jews were refusing to do it, and were starting to fight back against authorities. And it's also important to remember that the British also wanted the Jews to give up lands that they had took or bought or seized, leading up to 48, and the Jewish were actually fighting the British as well in insurgent guerrilla campaigns in leading up to their independence. So they were fighting everybody off to keep the areas that they had took. Now, did sometimes the Jewish settlers take that areas by force? Yes, they did, of course. And so if the Muslim folks would refuse to sell the land, for example, then there would be cases where they would seize it by force. And of course, that's dramatic, and that's exactly the kind of stuff that starts these grudges, these blood feuds. Is my grandfather, that was his land, and you just seized it. Well, there we go back again. Is it a 3,000-year-old land, or is it a couple hundred years old land? Is it your grandfather's land?
That was my initial question.
So
I don't think we recorded it, but my initial question before we started was like, how far back do we go with this entire, conflict?
Right. And that's essentially what we're doing. That's essentially where the propaganda machine works. If you're looking at in terms of the Israeli point of view, then it goes back thousands of years. If you're going from the Palestinian view, it goes back from 1948. So if you're just looking from 1948, then the Jews seemingly have seized control of the land. If you're going back thousands of years, then lots of other people took their own land, forced them off of it, and didn't allow them to come back to it until recently. So
it's just your frame of reference.
That's where
that is kind of determined.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, I think it's important to keep in mind the bigger context. The bigger context is that there's only 16 million Jews in the entire world. There's a 1.8 billion Muslims. And a huge, vast swath of people around Jerusalem is Muslim. And so the fact that essentially, now that we've kind of determined that these Palestinians are Arabs, right, of their ethnogenesis, then there's lots of other land. There's lots of other land. If they wanted to, they could go to live in. And they could be happy, and they could be amongst their people, and they would be in a place where there would be no Jews and no control of any Jewish state of any kind. Now, they would be essentially giving up, finally, their stake in the land. That's the real contentious issue in the modern times, is even Egypt doesn't want to open the border because essentially they know that most of those people will probably try and flee, and they may never come back. And in fact, Israel will likely take steps to make sure they don't come back. So you're essentially, ethnically cleansing. You're ethnically cleansing the land. Right. So you're engaging in that kind of stuff. That's how bad it's gotten when neither side can live on the same patch of land. But you have Arabs and Jews who are, one, I believe, has a homeland there. One has a homeland nearby. But the fact that the Arabs are refusing, even though they outnumber the Jews on a scale that's not even measurable, they can't seem to give up the size of Washoe County to let them have their own homeland, even though they have lots of land next door, all around, everywhere around. I mean, literally, Israel's surrounded by Muslim countries.
I have actually,
literally, they could.
I've seen that criticism before, where all these Muslim countries are kind of, asking all these European countries to send aid and take in all these people,
right.
And the criticism was that none of these Muslim countries are willing to do the same for like their own, what they should be their people.
Right.
So yeah, that's
like
a good.
And it's especially contentious.
All that Saudi oil money.
The Saudis are their sovereign wealth funds approaching $1 trillion, but they can't take in a single refugee from either the south or the north in Yemen or in and again they're right in the sense that if Egypt opens the border and Lebanon opens the border to the West Bank, or Jordan opens the border, if they flee, then Israel has de facto ethnically cleansed those regions, and now there is no more Arabs in that region. But if you can't live with your neighbor and you're going to rip open your neighbor's babies and stuff, then should you have to make that decision? And that's where this is the stuff that makes it so you got to, at some point, there's no easy answer. There's just bad options to choose from. Let's just choose from a bunch of bad options. And that's where they're at now. And, but I think in general, it's really tough because, the Jews face annihilation far more than 1.8 billion Muslims. And the fact that these few Arabs can't compromise on a small piece of land relatively, I know it's very important because they built the Dome of the Rock. And I should point out that in Muslim theology, the Dome of the Rock is very important and holy to them because it is said that is where Muhammad ascended to heaven. So he got on a white horse and he literally ascended to heaven on the Dome of the Rock. The fact that the Dome of the Rock is built on the western wall of the Jewish temple, we'll just leave that aside. But that is why it's so important to them and why they get so riled up is because it's considered a holy, holy site. It's only second. Jerusalem's only second to Mecca in the Islamic thing. There's only the two holiest cities in Islam is Mecca and Jerusalem. So there's that's literally the importance. But with that said, you guys already have so much land, you got so much population, you really can't compromise for the world and for the health of your own people who are living there. You can't just open your borders, let them move there, and allow a small, tiny population to survive in their own homeland. That's a rough. If you don't make compromises like that, that's a rough one.
Yeah,
I don't
it's such a messy, thing. I can't.
So messy. Yeah. That's the messy part right there. That is the, it's like
because
if they give up, they get cleansed. But if they don't give up, then essentially you can't give up just a little bit of land, and you have such an advantage over the Jews. Like in terms of numbers, it's not even. So, it's not like what I mean by that is that it's not like the Jews are threatening them existentially. The Jews are no threat to Muslims existentially. They are simply not. There's not literally enough of them to ever even be any threat to the wider Muslim world in any way. No way they could possibly do it. So the fact that you guys can't compromise on a little patch of land is telling to me.
To my understanding, did all this kind of start because of Saudi coming to the table with was it? I can't remember who it was. Was it?
Ooh, good. Yeah, good one, dude. Honestly, away from all the religious stuff and everything, this is the real politic, as they say, of why this is happening. This is exactly why. Because Israel and Saudi Arabia were about to sign a normalization treaty. That's exactly why this is really happening. That's what I've heard.
And then after this attack, Israel and Saudi stopped their negotiations over that, right?
For sure. They definitely had to put it on a cooler, yeah. But Hamas and the Palestinians in general knew this was coming, and I'm pretty sure I talked to you guys even months ago about this when we were talking about the Saudi-Israeli agreement that expects some fireworks because the Palestinians can't just stand aside and let them sign an agreement that essentially dooms the Palestinians to any hope of a two-state solution. Wow. If Saudis agree that Israel has the right to exist.
Because is that like a Muslim entity accepting the existence of Israel, or what is? Yeah,
correct. In 1948, I think it's important to remember. 1948, all the Muslim countries around them, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, all attacked them at the same time. Iraq, they all attacked them at the same. Israel at the same time. To everyone's surprise, including the world's, Israel actually beat them and then started to go on the offensive and started to take more Palestinian allocated lands. It took into Egypt. They took the Sinai Peninsula and all that stuff. So they actually started to expand out against them. So it stunned the Muslim world, stunned everybody, and they're like, "Oh shit, what's going on?" And so from that point on, the bad blood was there. But you should see the list of Muslim majority countries that don't even accept that Israel has the right to exist or acknowledge that it's a country.
That was my impression. Because right,
correct. They're as of now, still the one that's on that list is Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
Yeah. So our biggest ally is essentially pretending that they don't exist.
Wow.
And so the normalization treaty, which, by the way, was at least started in that direction under the Trump administration and Kushner, he at least started that process, although it wasn't finished. But Biden's administration continued it, even though we say that, but so they continued these same negotiations. And now Saudi Arabia and Israel are close to actually acknowledging that Saudis are close to acknowledging that Israel is a country and has a right to exist. Yeah. And Hamas, Palestinians in general, but Hamas in particular, could not allow that to happen. And so here we are. That's the real politic of why this happened now and the way it did.
What a messy combination of crazy religious wars
Just
combined with the political nonsense of everything else going on.
what makes it so bad too is that the original people that that caused the Jewish diaspora for 2,000 years don't exist. So there's nobody to blame. And so the Muslim world and the Western world essentially blame each other constantly, but because there's no one to blame, they essentially make up these grand things because they can't blame
They just want to be
people who
mad.
there is no
Yeah, they just want
Babylonians.
to be mad at someone pissed
Yeah.
off, and somebody has to be blamed for something.
Well,
yeah.
Well, because if you can blame the West for causing it, then you say, well, you take the Jews then, essentially is what they're saying. And then the Muslim and the Western says, well, you caused the problem, then you deal with
Right.
them. And neither sides want to deal with them, but really neither side's actually at fault. The people who created this problem
So
are long gone.
They don't exist.
And we're just cleaning up their messes. And but yeah, the current thing is Arabs are Palestinians. So there's plenty of, and Egypt's majority Arab, Lebanon's majority Arab, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, obviously. So you're surrounded by Arab countries. So the idea that they need this little tiny patch of land as their national sovereignty as Arabs is nonsense, because they dominate all the lands ethnically all around it.
Yep. Interesting.
But the real deal is that apart from all that, the real deal why they did this is the Saudi-Israeli potential agreement. That's the actual,
and then
that's the modern politics.
I feel like a lot of these people are putting like just the religious side as like their motivation, as like the fervor behind it all, and it's like that's not what's going on. That's
the thing that's always simmering. That's like always on the back burner, But the actual current events that we're dealing with right now are precipitated by Israel, Saudis potentially signing. I mean, the idea that in the 67 war or the 48 thing that the Saudis would ever sign anything to acknowledge Israel exists would be ridiculous. There was a time that the Muslim world would have never even done that. But do you know the first country to actually sign a treaty with Israel and acknowledge their right to exist is Egypt.
Oh, okay. What was the reasoning, or what happened for that?
Well, basically, the Israelis had beat them in a couple wars and had actually seized part of their land in the Sinai Peninsula. And to get their land back, they had to sign a treaty with Israel. So the Sinai Peninsula was handed back. Yeah, so that territory was handed back over. But just to give you an essence of how important how crazy of an issue it was, is the Egyptian president at the time was literally assassinated in public for signing this treaty with Israel.
Damn. So
yeah,
no one is happy about any of this stuff that has happened for so long, dude. You're so screwed.
So while Egypt may sign a treaty, while Saudi Arabia may sign a treaty, does that mean the Saudi people think Israel can exist? Does that mean Egypt people think will allow Israel to exist? No, I don't. That's a different thing.
Yeah, it's like, all right, yeah. So how do we sum this all kind of up? Like how do we get to?
Well, really quick, I want there to be that treaty between Saudi Arabia and Israel, because I think it further aligns Saudi Arabia as being one of our allies versus them buddying up with maybe India and China or Russia. Like I think it only favors us.
100%.
Only favors us.
This is also the real politic of it. We have to kind of look aside of some of the Saudi stuff and say, by signing this, you're aligning with us more, and we need that strategically.
Absolutely.
Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat was like beloved in Egypt, and then he signed a treaty with Israel, and like he was beloved, like he was going to be the Arab world's like dude, and they assassinated him like in public. His own military officials did.
What?
Yeah, so it just shows you like, yeah, it wasn't. It wasn't even. It was like. So there's a simmering in the Muslim world, and Hamas represents that. No compromise, no mercy. There's that fundamentalist side. Now, does that mean all Muslims like that? Not at all. Yeah. Don't be, nobody's. Yeah, it'd be so stupid to think that all Palestinians think that way. Yeah, or all Muslims think that way. No, But there is a branch, like in any faith or anything, of an extremist fundamentalist group, and there's a large amount of them, and they're represented by events like that, like when Sadat got killed by his own people for signing with Israel. Now, if the leader of Saudi wants to show that he's really about reform, especially after chopping up Jasko, that journalist, if he really wants to show he's about reform, it would be a great way to do that. Sign a treaty with Israel and acknowledge that it has the right to exist. So that would be a great also reform showing to the West that they're actually about what they're saying, and would definitely also bring us into more alignment against a Iran, China, Russia alliance that's clearly forming for sure, big time. And we don't want them dipping in with them, that's for sure. So now what Hamas essentially did now, though, is the stakes for what Israel is going to have to, and America is going to have to concede to actually get this signed now, is going to be much steeper than it would have been to get the Saudis to now sign this.
Do you think they will?
Obviously,
or do you think it will continue?
I think without a doubt, with the emotions are too high. It's one of those moments that we think it's impossible because the emotions are so high. But I can almost guarantee you, once things calm down,
there's probably so much money on the line there that they're just not.
Right.
See, I want to see it go down like an old mafia Italian movie, maybe spaghetti western, where Israel destroys the shit out of Hamas, even Palestine if they want, and then they go to Saudi and be like, "Hey, I'm sorry, we had to whack your cousin." And Saudi says,
"Oh yeah."
And Saudi says, "Hey man, I mean, my cousin, get a little out of line. I would have killed him myself, but my mama would have been mad, so I couldn't do it." Yes, he gets out of line all the time.
Well, if we weren't
you totally nailed it.
My mama would have killed me if I killed my own
politics.
Cousin. Better you do it than me.
That's real politics, man. That's so true. That's spot on, because real politics says like I'll never sign with them, but the realness is there's going to be conditions where I'm gonna find a reason to So, but Anwar Sadat was assassinated by fundamentalist army officers on October 1981 for his role in that. So isn't that fascinating? But you're right. I think the Saudis facing like major trouble that right now emotionally, because of what Hamas did, they literally can't sign anything. But I'll make a bet here, and since we're recording it, all the better to say that at some point the Saudis will sign this normalization agreement, because it's just too much in their interests on multiple levels.
Do you think that'll cause more conflict with the other Muslim?
Without a doubt. So these same fundamentalists that are riven in every Muslim society will, you might see attacks on the royal family of the Saudis. You might see attacks in Saudi. You'll probably see some ISIS like suicide bombings in Saudi somewhere or something. So there's going to be definitely consequences for it. But I don't think anybody expected what Hamas was going to do, and that was more shocking than what I
think that was their kind of their purpose, was the shock value in order to make sure that nothing was going to happen there. I think that was. I mean, obviously, I don't know.
But the bigger scale was the strategy. You're right. The bigger scale was a strategy of stopping this treaty getting signed, and they did achieve that. Yeah, for now. But I think I honestly believe it's not the end of the story. They're going to sign it, but it's just that right now it's clearly there's no way the Saudis can, without facing the wrath of a riled up Muslim world. There's literally no way that they can sign that. So in that sense, you could say also that it might be a strategy by Iran and Russia and China, like the new alliance. I've been hearing rumors that they're talking about like they could do this to exactly prevent those alliances from developing between Israel and Saudi. How do you break that up? How do you weaken your enemy's alliances systems? This would be a great way to do it. I don't think necessarily they needed their help. I don't really think they needed Russia and Iran's help, because the underlying thing is the Palestinians to maintain their land had to do something. They had to do something to prevent the Saudis from signing. They had to do something, They had to do something. So they did something.
So I gotta wonder how Israel did not see it coming with their intelligence agencies,
That's
Mossad,
a big topic. That's a
and
big
they're
topic.
considered one of the most brilliant, bright, powerful, intelligent agencies in the world. And when you hear that Hamas created a replica city inside of Gaza, so they knew exactly how to infiltrate it, like, how did they not see this coming?
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me.
That's what I was saying on that other one of the text that we were talking about. It's like the cybersecurity division is getting hammered really hard right now because they let's take it back to that recently, the Gaza hospital strike. They actually had some recordings of Hamas operatives talking about how they misfired the rocket. And so the reason that this issue got so bad, I believe, and it'll probably come out it'll be more complicated, but I think one of them is Israeli intelligence thought they were listening on the right channels. And they are shocked to find out that the channels they were listening in for attack coordination plans were not, and they were out, and they were duped, and they were outthought on terms of their communications networks. And that's where they're freaking out, and they're also their leadership is probably hammering them, like, "What, you guys thought you were talking to the main channels of a communication?"
That's a big mistake.
And big mistake, huge mistake. Somebody really messed up really bad, thinking that they had tabs on it, and they clearly didn't. Like you said, they were even like recording like mock invasion test runs and stuff, like all the Hamas was leading up to the attack. So the reason why I bring that up is because it's an example that the IDF has access to a lot of their communication networks. And so they just recorded this and literally published it of Hamas talking between two people on radios. And so they thought they had that under control, the communication networks. And come to find out, well, there might be some more sophisticated Muslim IT people out there. You might have thought that out a little bit better, but they clearly developed a system that allowed them to circumvent their communication network. And that's what caught them so off guard, is they didn't even, usually those communication networks would tell them something's coming down the pipeline, And
I even heard rumors that I think it was like Egypt or somebody gave Israel like an inclination that the attack was coming or something like that. I remember.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but it's like with something that complicated, you don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, kind of thing. So I understand that side, but it's like if you're told that there's a big invasion coming, obviously we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. But
we do. And us being over here, all it is speculation.
All speculation.
Speculation just can often lead adrift. Yeah. Because the more you speculate mathematically, the more you're going to be wrong. And therefore, it just compounds into something that was never how it started.
The shock and awe of it was the information campaigns going in the future was it's generally coming clear and clear with more evidence. And there's still some I'm totally, but there's some interesting aspects that it seemed now at this point that actually Hamas misfired a rocket and it landed in the hospital thing, right? That's the emerging view. I'm not 100%, but that's the emerging view. It does seem to be at the intelligence. Like I said, the IDF literally released audio and stuff of other field operatives in Hamas talking about it. But either way, what's so incredible is how much it hit all the major news channels, all the social media, and within a day, I mean, the world was like a rage over Israel bombing a hospital. And it turned out to be logistically and truthfully not accurate. But the actual damage of the power of that was incredible to see. And we got to see it first time. This is how propaganda works. This is how disinformation networks work. We saw real time how this shit works and how powerful
that's
it is.
So true.
There's a quote that I heard Tim Pool say: "A lie will make it around the world before the truth can even get its boots on."
That's so true.
Exactly. This was it. This was that right there. I mean, it literally, everyone who was pro-Palestinian wanted the Israelis to bomb a hospital. So when they did, when they had the propaganda material to do so, then they could use it as that they did do it. And that was just the power of the wish. I guess it's the power of the wish can be manifested with propaganda and powerful information tools. that you can make a wish a reality somehow.
And for those
Almost.
listening, Alex, explain what actually happened with the hospital.
Oh, right. Yeah. So there was, according to this IDF release report, is there the Hamas two operatives were talking about that they had fired from a cemetery behind the hospital, and the rocket had went up and misfired, and then ended up landing. It detonated in the air wrongly, and then landed in the parking lot. And from what they're saying is like it hadn't even burned all its rocket fuel. So then the real terror was also that it started to burn up and light shit on fire in the parking lot. So it looked like this huge thing, but what actually had happened, as far as we can determine at this point, is that Hamas actually fired a rocket that killed a bunch of people at the hospital, and not Israel. Does that mean Israel wasn't bombing other targets before that? No, but to be clear, they haven't at this point the Israelis did not bomb this hospital, but the propaganda was able to send
there's
there's
like a secondary war going on of just propaganda,
right?
And just
exactly
global kind of like whole that they're trying to get like.
Make no mistake, there's a hearts and minds campaign going. Yeah, there's a war. There's a hearts and minds war going on right now. Exactly, and that was one of them.
One thing I want to add: before last Sunday. And last Sunday and Monday, you could look up Hamas's Wikipedia page, and on their own Wikipedia, it talked about how they would use places like hospitals and schools as their actual bases for protection.
Right.
So anyone who thinks that if Israel literally did bomb a hospital of any sort in any fashion, it's because on their own Wikipedia page, it talks about how they use those things to disguise where their military operations are. Hamas.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, they're not the only one. I remember distinctly the Hezbollah war with Israel in 2006. And that one was particularly where the Hezbollah militants would literally store munitions in designated civilian buildings. So Israel had no choice but to strike them. And when you're facing that kind of asymmetrical warfare, the rage is going to come from the people. But if you're talking about as a military commander, you have to attack it. Like, that's how are you going to degrade the enemy's capabilities? They're going to have rockets unless you blow up their rockets. So you have to attack their rockets. The fact that they are so cruel to their own people that they're going to storm in a hospital or a school or these other sort of things. But then it works in an information war. Then I distinctly remember Israel struck a school in Lebanon during that war. Well, the fact that it was used as a base is, I guess, a side point, but you can sure get people riled up saying that they struck a school.
Yep.
That's like double speak in that sense, where you're just like covering it with
totally
speech, covering the reality of the speech.
And that's why, unfortunately, even though if we're talking about just like military strategy, then they should do whatever they need. But in terms of, because there's this hearts and minds war being waged, they actually have to fight with one hand tied behind their back, essentially. And to be frank, so does America. America does too, like the Iraq wars and Afghanistan wars and the Vietnam wars. If we were actually talking about, can we actually military do what we need to do to win? That's different than enraging people to the point that we have to leave. So, they're two different things. And then now Israel faces the same problem we had with that in those wars.
Because the American people would have probably not let our country not go to war. And after 9/11.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
after 9/11, they would have been like, "What the?
Well,
we're not gonna punch someone back after they just hit us in the face."
Right. Like they're not going to do something. Yeah, but I've always said, like, with that was the disaster only because Afghanistan, when the Taliban wasn't going to give up Bin Laden, had to go in. Like, y'all dudes got it. It's how it has to happen. But Iraq totally didn't need to happen. Didn't need to go in there. That was one of those. Is like, it was really unnecessary. Saddam was actually known for fighting the jihadis. So he was known in the Muslim world, ironically, as being a nationalist and was against the jihadis, like the Osama bin Ladens of the world. So the irony there is always hilarious. But if Afghanistan had to go in, it's kind of like what they face now. They could go up into Lebanon and West Bank and do a whole bunch of stuff, but they have to go into the Gaza because of what happened. I mean, It's like us with Afghanistan. There's really you can't just let that go unpunished. That's
Which from the
that's the
Palestinian
reality of things.
perspective, they must have known that this was coming, right? They must have known that this retaliation would have been tenfold on their end. So from a long term,
Did every Palestinian in the Gaza know?
Right.
No, but did a lot of them know? Did plenty know? And someone could have said something.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh
Mhm.
yeah, for
So
sure.
it's an
I'm
interesting
sure.
long-term play for them. They must, have something going on. I don't know.
I could just see them kicking back on their couches, be like, "Did you hear Cousin Eddie's fucking gonna bomb Israel next week?" Oh, I fucking heard
For
that
sure.
too. I heard it at the bar. Everyone's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important to point out too that the actual, do you know where the leadership of Hamas is? It sure as hell is not in Gaza. And if the leadership was actually in Gaza, then there would have been a peace treaty signed decades ago. But because they get to hole up in Qatar and actually are completely safe from any missile strikes in Qatar, they actually get to basically be puppet masters, and the Palestinians die in Gaza while they get to live in palaces in Qatar. So it's literally the most grotesque of the conditions. Even worse so because Israel can't realistically strike them. That would immediately start a real war between Iran, because Qatar is protected by Iran. So they're essentially untouchable in Qatar. And but if they actually had to live with the people which they send to these disasters, I bet you they would they'd be much more willing to sign. It's all the more gross that they can sit back on their couches in Qatar while the people, their own people, suffer from the decisions they made on their couches. So that is the current situation. Now, is Israel,
What did you say?
So it almost makes you want the Saudi treaty with Israel to go forward, because it almost forces more peace in their positioning where Saudi is, their resources, Israel, and then you have Iran in the middle and Qatar in the middle, and it's like it almost has a forced peace. It's like, okay, we're almost in this Mexican duel where everyone's pointing a gun to the guy to their right. You know, not really realizing that there's one to the back of their head in a giant circle.
Right, exactly. So here's the issue, and here's the strategic question. The more vengeance the Israelis go for right now, the longer it will take the Saudis to allow a treaty. So how much vengeance do you exact to, in longer term, establish the alliance?
Correct.
That's the real, and that's
like the major.
So that
question.
is
Absolutely.
Strategically, how do you get around that? Your people are demanding vengeance. A lot of the world is, and rightly so. But at the same time, you have this bigger security alliance you can begin to build against Iran and its allies in the region. If you hold back and you withhold from your worst impulses.
And so, I think it's as much as it should not be something where you have to go to Saudi Arabia and say, hey, we had a deal on the table. We're close to signing this deal. This happened.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to say, what are you guys okay with us doing? Can we just wipe out the Gaza Strip completely, send them off into the sea, and us keep going? Because they might be like, hey, like in a sense, they're our people. So I'm going to say no. Or they might be like, hey, get away with them. They're a problem for everybody. And then we can keep an eye on Iran and whatnot. So I don't know. I think there should be something cordial there with the person you're just about to sign a treaty with, who is of the same Arab nation.
Right. And that's why that shuttle diplomacy, I think, on the real politic behind the scenes, you'll never see this on a news thing, but there might be some Israeli military and Saudi folks sit down and saying that exact thing, like, just how much can we do here? And they'll really get into the nitty gritty of it. And I think you'd often be surprised how much the Saudis would be willing to allow, so that's an interesting dynamic. But because they have before, in the other wars, 2006, et cetera, et cetera. So They allow it to go to a point, but there is a point when their own people are baying for their own blood if they allow the Israelis to go too far.
Yeah,
So
that's the thing.
they do have
Because
to.
you can't
Yeah,
not
that's the
do
thing.
anything.
Mhm.
Because then what does that say to your people?
No.
Oh, we're bending the knee to
Oh, yeah.
Saudi Arabia after we just
Right.
got
For
fucking
sure.
fucked in our ass?
Then the government's gone. Boom.
Yep.
Government's gone overnight.
Yeah.
You know, they're gone.
Netanyahu's freaking, they're lynching him.
Oh, he's
He's already
In
done.
the
He's already
streets.
done from this, but like, yeah.
done.
But in that context, I was even referring to the Saudis. Like, the Saudis would actually allow a lot more than I think we would, the Saudi royal family. But it's the Saudi people who would literally be blowing up their own country if it got too nuts with Israel bombing too much shit. You know what I'm saying?
Agree.
Like, if Israel, you know what I mean? Yeah. So they have to cap it to a point where, but they're discussing it right now.
Yeah, and I'm saying that the Israeli people would lynch Netanyahu if he was like, you know what, we're not doing nothing.
As well.
We're not doing nothing. We're just going to sign with Saudi. We're bending the knee to them.
That's right.
Yeah. He was already on thin ice.
Yeah, if that's also what Hamas did strategically in this is it forced the Israelis' hands. They can't just kneel now. There's no way they can just bend the knee to the Saudis. They literally can't. So Hamas has also forced the Saudis into a corner, which is enraging as well because they shouldn't have to use violence, but now they have to. They got to use some violence. They can't just not. They're going to be driven out of their own government. So if they don't,
it has to be kind of like the old mob rules, like in the movie, but serious version of saying what won't hurt business, because right now this is hurting business for us both. Who can we take out that you're okay with, that we're okay with, because they are messing with business. Okay, they're messing with our relationship. Yes, your nephew got out of hand, slapped the wrong person in public, and we want
that kind of thing. Yep.
You know, like, what is okay? And everyone comes to the table, they make a deal. Some person has to get whacked. Some person gets his beak wet a little bit here or there, and we move forward with business. It's really what
I totally agree. That's a great. Is that what it's called? Analogy? That's a great analogy. That's like great comparison of how this is going to have to work. It's going to be mob rules for a minute out there, and it's going to be ugly because mob rules are never pretty, but it has to be. I think even like you're saying, like the IDF is posting on Twitter and stuff when they take out Hamas military commanders and stuff. Like those kind of people, they're now free reign. I'm sure even a few years ago or months ago, those guys were not. You couldn't just assassinate them at will, but now they are just missile striking them and just taking them out just at will. And that's exactly what you're saying. Like the Saudis are allowing this essentially to go without.
How long?
But up to one point,
how far can it go?
And the red line the kind of red lines is if you wanted the Gazans to flee, you could strike a couple hospitals and stuff, and everyone's going to flee to Egypt once Egypt opens the border. But then the Saudis and their own people are going to riot and destroy the whole thing. So they can't do that either. And plus, you wouldn't want that kind of moral kind of problems that it creates and the Hearts and Minds campaign anyways. So it makes no strategic reason why Israel would strike the hospital. It would only hurt them strategically. So, but the Saudis have to put up with some of this, but how much they're going to put up with is the real question. I think you're right. And they're having those discussions right now, probably through our Western intermediators. They're talking about it.
They're getting there.
But the Saudis and Israel,
they're getting their beaks dipped too. They're saying, hey, we're coming to the table.
Dude.
While we're at it, I mean, let's do some oil deals. I'll make things easier.
We'll give you some of our special forces guys also, so it can be quiet and into the night.
Right. There you go. Exactly.
They're going to be
stuff like that. That's true.
Here. Take some of our finest, some
and
black.
There it is. That's great, man. That's good song.
Yeah, some off the books, guys from the United States.
Yeah, just being totally assassinated. Like that's completely like by UN Geneva conventions. Like they're just assassinating people openly now, and that's what happens if you do kind of these Hamas attacks. You got to expect that now you no longer have any protection.
See, that makes no sense. Why would you do such a crazy... I guess you don't have any choice. I guess they literally just didn't have a choice.
You don't have any choice. That's the thing with the Palestinians, though. They had no choice. Remember, I wish I'd saved that, and I hope I can find that text, but I had sent you guys months ago we were talking about Israel and Saudi potentially signing, and I said that there was going to be some kind of trouble. I'm pretty sure I said that. Of course, I didn't know it was going to be like this. I thought maybe like some rockets that landed in Tel Aviv or something, you know, like some kind of.
Anybody expected
but nothing
this.
like
Yeah,
this. This was this was
totally.
pretty. Yeah. So that's the real reason why this has happened. We got the whole history and the whole religion behind it, but also the real grounded why this happened now. The Palestinians have to do something before this alliance is signed. It's not even an alliance. It's just an acknowledgement.
Right.
But once you open the door to the fact that Israel can even exist, then you have the Muslim world's going to be enraged. And
what a messy mess of crazy nonsense.
The Middle East is so crazy that in politics and history and everything, it is a whole nother animal, dude. It's a whole different thing. All of it's so crazy and convoluted and nonsensical that some politician, some foreign policy guys have jokingly said, it's just joke, but just nuke the whole region, start over, because it's so entangled with so much terrible history and everything that it's just like you're never going to really untangle it. But just to be clear, that was just that's just like a joke.
Yeah. No, and then
do not do that.
We're not condoning that. No, and then we have us Americans who are like sitting behind our iPhones and our keyboards who have the highest opinions of everything, right? Like we already been speculating, right?
Of course,
yeah. Especially all over our college campuses.
Yes, that is a big.
Our universities, these guys got it all figured out. Apparently, those poor Palestinians, but not Arab somehow. They just want their little patch of land. That's all, just the Jews' homeland, just the Jews' homeland.
Now those people have Ukrainian flags and Palestinian flags in their bio,
which is hilarious because
just both.
I don't think a majority of them would be accepted into Palestinian culture. You know what I mean?
They'd be the first ones murdered.
Oh, I mean, there's
that might be a generalization. I'm not sure, but as far as I know, I don't think they would do too hot in that culture. But that's just
the endless memes on Twitter of that, where it's just like these people are such morons. Like the purple-haired gay person for pro Palestine
obviously doesn't know
and
what they're religious,
right?
Yeah.
Just to be very clear, the Salafi fundamentalists, they prescribe to the original punishment of homosexuality. And that would be, one of them was to take him on a tall building and drop him from the top of a building. So that's your actual pro-Palestinian thing. Now, are all Palestinians fundamentalists? No, but you can take some from some of those interviews when they did at Palestinian schools, what they think about non-believers and Jews. You can kind of get a sense, perhaps, that you're supporting the people that would eat you alive.
And don't forget, when they drop you off those tall buildings, if you can fly, they will not try and shoot you after.
That's right. If you can somehow survive.
The clause of if you survive and or fly, they'll let you be accepted.
Well, hey, they got some leniency.
That's it.
There,
you're good to go.
Good,
But somehow there's never any gays because they never seem to survive.
They never do.
Somehow.
Weird.
But that's the idiocy of our current ultra left is they're literally supporting people who would eat them alive, and they literally don't even understand. They're that ignorant. And these are the people who profess to be the ones of knowledge and education, and we're so sophisticated. We're the knowledgeable ones. We actually read stuff. But do you though? Because you're proving that you actually don't by your actions, and those always speak much louder than words to me. If you're pro-Palestine. Does that mean all Palestinians are anti-gay and LGBT? No, but there's enough of them that would cause severe problems compared to the Jewish take on that. I think that's more complicated, but in general, there's just a general more tolerance for. There's plenty of gay folk in Israel. I think there's even a gay pride parade in Israel. And let me check my sources, but I don't think there's one in Hamas territory. I don't need to check. There isn't.
No.
Oh my god.
There is not. So So this is the kind of stuff. That's how insane these people on ultra left are. They literally don't even read their own. What would preserve their own livelihood and lives is.
I don't think they want to know.
They're not even self-preserving.
I don't think they really want it. They just want to be a part of a part of a movement.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're just in for the emotion. I think a lot of these movements and these kind of events like this, people are just they just want to
or something.
I don't know how to say it,
I
but
just want to be a part of like the driving force of good or something. I don't know.
I just want to go in for the emotional, like, thing, but to not have any real.
I noticed.
Wouldn't that be great?
The biggest zealots, and I say religious zealots because it's these things are their religion.
Right.
They are oftentimes the most like unfulfilled people that they have to grasp.
Right.
Jordan Peterson talks about it. How he's like, you got these young kids who want to go out and they're fighting for climate change, like it is their religion, but they're not making their own bed. He gives that example, or that they're fighting for Black Lives Matter, but they're not making their own bed. And it's like because they have just this emptiness that they need to be like filling that void. And so they feel instead of filling what's going to fill their void is them fixing the world.
Yeah. No, that's a
right, exactly.
But it actually it can't. Right. That is something that can't fill our voids.
Dude, that's a pretty common.
It's an emotional. It's emotional black hole you can just pour stuff into, but
people don't want to deal with their own problems, so they see these other problems that they can kind of just
yes. Instead of dealing with my problems of why I'm unhappy, filled with anxiety and depression,
I can shout these words confusion. And feel good about that I'm doing something good.
I'm gonna tell.
Since I'm a kid, I've always thinking like. You should, because every people should be proud to be themselves, but a lot of those people on the ultra left like hate themselves, hate their identity, hate their race, whatever that is, and hate their hate those things of themselves, and that self-hatred perpetuates to feel better. They get behind causes that literally they throw them off buildings and stuff. Like it's insanity. They literally get to a point that they're literally an insane. They're supporting causes that are destructive to their own self-preservation, but. That is because at emotional core, they're like super unhappy with themselves as people. And every group should be proud of who they are because everyone has, if you learn about your own history, man, every history has really cool stuff, amazing stuff to learn from and brilliant eras. Every people had a golden age. Every people had a golden age and should be proud of it.
And then on that inverse, I feel like every people has had like a dark time where they've done terrible
correct.
Things, right?
Yes.
Like
that is also correct. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So they should also be tempered with humility. Right. Like we're not super number one, but no, we've all done our shit and we've all had our golden age. So you should be proud of yourself and not self-hate yourself. The ultra left steps into this like I hate myself so much, so I'm gonna support essentially my ideological enemy. I'm gonna support them. Smart. You guys are idiots.
Yeah, and I think this is a good spot to end because I think we could talk about this actual subject for another hour.
Absolutely.
I think there's so much that we could talk about around all of this for a while. And
the American people's like reaction to the events. Like we just went over, I think we did a great job of going over the reaction to the events and the details. But what about the Americans' reactions to it? That could be an entire other podcast.
Yeah,
easily.
Again,
right there.
How we can correlate all those to history.
Yes, exactly.
So much of that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Very well, sir. Exactly.
So yeah, I mean,
awesome.
We had a fucking great podcast.
Absolutely. I'd like to see comments and we'll get canceled and people are going to attack us and people are going to say crazy stuff about Palestinians and Israelis. And,
they're not going to like me asking what is actually a Palestinian. I'm sure that's getting all the likes.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what? And this is how you randomly get invited on CNN or Fox News. They're like, "Hey, you stranger, come on here."
The guy who said that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You're inflaming social media right now. Would you like to come on the network?
I want to tell them you actually guys don't get enough views. I'm waiting for Joe Rogan to call me or Lex Friedman.
There you go.
Exactly. And you guys are talking nonsense, so I'm just going to avoid that and just post what I think.
So you said this about Palestinians, and it was like, wait, completely out of context.
Yeah, I said a lot more.
Well, that ends our segment today. That was Jesse Carstairs, who hates everybody.
Jesse is a bigot. Now let's move on to our next.
Yes.
They just cut that whole thing.
It's like
Yeah, that's the environment we're in. If we don't learn it ourselves, and I think that's why it's important, is if we don't learn it and teach it to each other as fellow Americans, we can't
Yeah.
depend on these news things to
Yeah.
teach us. I think you nailed it exactly. If we're going to depend on them to educate us on what's going on out there,
Well, that's why I like
already
these free
done.
forums and I like the Twitter Spaces and stuff, because this is us putting our
Right.
view out, our ideas out there, our speculation out there, and it's up to the audience now to help us understand. So please leave your
Exactly.
comments and leave your thoughts as well, because we need to
Absolutely. Yeah, please
Yeah.
do. We'll try and engage with you within reason.
And whether you care, whether you value our speculation or what our opinion is on current events, I think we do a pretty good job of the historical accuracy that we talk about of other things. So
Yeah. I hope someone
Absolutely. And tell us how we can improve. That is important to all of us, all three of us, I think, on the high mark. And so as commenters, tell us if there's ways we can help improve getting the message
Absolutely.
to you, because that's important to us. I would like to more of the history. Like you said, you can't really know the future of where we're going and where we're at and how we're doing without knowing the history. So we want to make that more part of the
yeah,
show.
and I feel like
Sure.
digging into an accurate history versus all the like hugs and kisses that they teach you in like K through 6,
Mhm.
at least when we were there.
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's really important to be
Yeah.
able to actually like take history at face value, not like the warped, views that we are kind of, pushed on nowadays. So yeah.
Exactly. Palestinians are not people, they're Arabs, and they got a homeland already. Their homeland's just fine. So that's exactly one of those contexts where if we were to just rely on the news, apparently
We're all lost.
the homeland of the Palestinians is being
Yeah.
stolen. But
That's why I think we're so lost.
it's not quite that simple.
And just everybody's so lost. And there's so many different points being
Mhm.
pushed. It's so hard to understand. And if you don't know the historical context, it's so hard to place it.
How can you possibly how could you possibly know?
Yeah, and here's a little nugget prop to the Middle East, because I'm sure a lot of listeners out there don't know that Iran at one point was like the first world country when Europe looked like a third world
Yeah.
country.
Oh man.
And they invented fucking algebra.
man.
The
Yeah.
Middle East was kicking ass, but they didn't teach us that in school. They just say there was the Dark Ages in Europe, and that's all that happened. And it's like, well, the Middle
That's
East,
all that happened.
the
There's
Middle
no,
East was
yeah.
on fucking fire. Like, not
Mhm.
literal. They were fucking kicking ass and taking names.
Yeah.
They had their golden age as
Yeah.
well, and
props
that should
to
be
them.
definitely emphasized. And they were doing a big thing. Also, that in that same context, they often were only taught about European slavery. Well, there's also a huge one that's just as large and actually lasted longer, and that's the Arab slave
Mhm.
trade from Africa. So both the Africans were taken from Europe by Europeans and Arabs for centuries. But most people don't even, I
You
think,
can't talk about
even know
how
about
there
that.
was even slavery.
You can't talk about
today.
that. I'll get canceled
Yeah.
culture. I'll get
I
canceled
think we'll
culture.
pass that,
But
guys.
it's facts.
Dude, one more, and then we'll end. That the United States, the slavery in the United States was one of the shortest stints in the history of slavery.
Of that, yeah. Was it brutal? Yes. Did it do all that stuff? Yes. I'm not sugarcoating it in any way, but in terms of time and in terms of that, every other country did engage in it. Yes, it's
Yeah, in terms of numbers, it's like
the fact that they teach it like we're the only country that ever did it is my only problem with it. We should definitely educate
Mhm.
about it and know about slavery, and especially racial types of slavery. But were we the only country engaging in slavery and racial slavery? No, not even close. The Arabs did it for
and
centuries
were we the
before us.
country that set the example to end it? Fuck yes, we were. Nobody else did. That was us.
Being
America.
1862, weren't we one of the first? I think besides like
Yeah,
the British, we were one of the
I think
first
British,
to
I
ban.
think it was like the British and us.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
Mhm.
It's because they saw us doing
And
it.
also, I would like to point out that Ethiopia. So the Rastafarian movement, viewers, the Rastafarian movement. It's generally anti-Western and stuff, and it centers around Ethiopia and the king of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie. Guess when Ethiopia banned slavery?
2005.
1942. So when did America do that again? 1862. So
Yeah.
just consider that in mind. If you really think America's your only enemy or America's the only people that engaged in this stuff, your big movement country ended it long after the United States did. So that's a reality check for the propaganda you're taught in your schools right now. You're not taught that, though, for sure. I guarantee that.
So take the historical context and match it with what we got going on now.
And get better, get stronger, vote smarter with it. That's I think, what's one of our main goals with this is exactly how we started this podcast.
Yeah.
We want all of us fellow Americans, it's time for us to vote smarter, better. I don't know what it is, but
step up in general. I
better.
feel like just Americans in general.
And not let CNN or Fox News teach us it. We're going to learn it for ourselves.
Absolutely.
So countries like North Korea, Libya, Afghanistan, Qatar, Sudan, and Pakistan, and India, and Bangladesh are all considered countries who still actually used forced labor. So slavery.
Yeah, exactly.
Today.
And it's not official anymore. It's not even official anymore. But I'm talking about like officially, yes, we have slaves, was 1942 in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is the center of Rastafarianism. So if you're really like a white man is the devil, is where that term comes from, is Rastafarian, like Jamaican dude. If that really is what you're saying and what you're thinking, and this is how ignorant your own thing is slavery was ended after the United States.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want logic, Alex. They just want emotion, and they just want to feel.
Yes.
They want emotion. Exactly. What am I saying? Exactly.
Logic.
One, I want to say thank you to anyone who listened to the whole 2 hours and 15 minutes of this, but also comment what else you want us to touch on. What else you want us to talk about.
Yes. Please.
We'd love to hear from you guys.
With that, exiting episode 6.